In the heart of Oaxaca, Mexico, where cobblestone streets still whisper the stories of colonial days, stood the Mendoza mansion, a house that commanded respect before one even stepped through its heavy oak doors. Built in the early 1700s, its architecture reflected not just wealth, but also power and prestige. The Mendoza family, known throughout Oaxaca for their influence in trade and politics, resided within those tall stone walls. To the people of the town, the mansion wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of what could be achieved through discipline, ambition, and legacy. When sunlight fell across its intricate balconies and iron-forged railings, the house seemed to glow with a majesty that dwarfed the humble adobe homes nearby. The enormous courtyard held fountains of carved Cantora stone, where water sparkled like jewels. Tall arches framed corridors lined with imported tiles from Spain, each one painted by hand. Inside, walls were covered with family portrait, each ancestor staring back with pride, their eyes carrying stories of generations that had fought, sacrificed, and labored to rise from obscurity to prominence. But grandeur isn't only about appearance, it's about meaning. The Mendoza mansion carried more than just aesthetic beauty. It represented a family philosophy that one's environment shapes one's vision. The Mendoza family believed in surrounding themselves with reminders of excellence. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes on history, philosophy, mathematics, and art. Chandeliers, imported from France, hung above dinner tables where conversations about ideas, politics, and progress lasted late into the night. This atmosphere was intentional. Don Rafael Mendoza, the patriarch during the mid-19th century, often told his children, "We do not live in this house because we are rich. We live here because we are disciplined and because every stone of this home reminds us of the sacrifices our ancestors made. If we forget that, the house becomes nothing more than walls and dust." And perhaps that is why the mansion held such weight for the people of Oaxaca. It wasn't only admired, it was respected. Locals knew that the Mendoza family employed many townspeople, paying fair wages and offering apprenticeships to young men eager to learn trades. Farmers supplied the mansion's kitchens, seamstresses sewed the family's garments, and artists painted religious icons for the home's chapel. In this way, the Mendoza fortune was not kept locked away, but circulated back into the community. The mansion became a hub of opportunity. Still, its grandeur had another layer: mystery. For all the openness the Mendoza family displayed in public affairs, there were parts of the mansion where no outsider was allowed. Certain wings were kept locked, their doors sealed with elaborate ironwork. Rumors spread through the town. Was there something hidden within those halls, perhaps treasures brought from Spain, or archives of political secrets too dangerous to reveal? Children dared each other to run up to the great gates and press their ears against the wood, hoping to catch echoes of what lay inside. But those who admired the Mendoza mansion most were not the curious children or the gossiping neighbors. It was the ambitious dreamers of Oaxaca. For them, the house represented possibility. It was proof that greatness could be built, even in a land where poverty often limited horizons. The grandeur of the mansion was not simply wealth, it was the discipline behind it. The Mendozas rose by working relentlessly, by thinking beyond immediate survival, and by passing down a vision larger than themselves. One young shoemaker, who often delivered crafted boots to the family, once told his apprentice, "When you step into their home, you realize something. They don't just live in wealth, they live in responsibility. Every candle, every painting, every book, they carry it with purpose. That is why they are who they are." And this observation reveals the hidden truth behind grandeur. It is not about what you have, but about what you create with what you have. The Mendoza mansion wasn't revered because it was filled with gold or silver. Its real grandeur came from being a living classroom, a place where ambition met discipline, where history met hope, where beauty met purpose. Still, such grandeur carried a warning as well. The townspeople knew that wealth could corrupt. History had shown many families rising in splendor only to collapse in arrogance. Yet for generations, the Mendoza family held firm to their principle: our house is not for us, it is for those who come after us. In this way, the grandeur of the Mendoza mansion becomes a lesson for us today. We may not live in colonial estates with fountains and chandeliers, but we each build our own kind of mansion. It might be our career, our family, our reputation, or our legacy. The question is not whether it is big or small, but whether it is built with integrity. The Mendoza mansion stood tall because it was built on discipline, sacrifice, and responsibility, not merely ambition. If you think about it, we all leave behind mansions, for others to inherit, not physical houses, but the results of our lives. Our children, friends, and communities walk through the hallways of our choices long after we are gone. The grandeur of your mansion is measured not by how high its walls rise, but by how deeply its foundation is set in values. The Mendoza mansion still stands in Oaxaca today, though weathered by time. Tourists admire its architecture, historians study its records, and locals tell stories of its locked doors and hidden secrets. But beyond the stones and tiles, the true grandeur of that house, the Mendoza mansion, is not just a piece of Oaxaca's history. It is a mirror to every one of us, asking the same question. Oaxaca in the 19th century was a city alive with color, tradition, and noise. Its markets were always filled with voices, vendors calling out prices, women bargaining for maize and beans, children chasing each other around wooden stalls. But sometimes, when the day grew quiet and conversations dipped into more hushed tones, the words were not about corn or chilies. They were about the Mendoza family. For decades, the Mendoza mansion had stood as one of the most striking buildings in all of Oaxaca. A colonial-era structure with high arched windows, iron balconies, and walls covered with vines. It looked both beautiful and intimidating. Everyone admired its grandeur, yet behind that admiration grew whispers. Stories passed from one neighbor to another, tales exchanged in the marketplace when strangers leaned closer to one another. What were the Mendozas hiding? Why was their home always guarded so tightly? Why did no one ever see the family beyond the gates except during Sunday Mass? The people in the marketplace had theories, and theories can be dangerous when repeated often enough. The whispers began simply. A woman selling pottery once claimed she had seen strange lights flickering in the Mendoza mansion late at night, long after candles were usually extinguished. Another man who delivered wine to the household said he was never allowed beyond the front hall. The maids who worked there, when they did return to the markets, spoke little, and when asked about their employers, they quickly changed the subject. This silence only fueled more questions. The Mendoza family was wealthy, generous to the church, and polite in public. Yet they were guarded, almost secretive. Unlike other wealthy families who attended fiestas, opened their homes to visitors, or mingled freely in the town square, the Mendozas remained distant. That distance left a void, and human nature has a way of filling voids with imagination. So the whispers grew louder. Some in the marketplace claimed the family had discovered something, perhaps a treasure from colonial times, hidden beneath their mansion. Others suggested the Mendozas were practicing secret rituals, mixing faith with something forbidden. A few insisted the family kept someone hidden away, perhaps an heir who was ill or a relative whose presence they wanted to conceal. At first, these theories were told as jokes, stories to pass the time while weighing fruit or arranging cloth. But over time, the tone grew more serious. I heard it from a cousin of a servant. One person would say, "My uncle swore he saw soldiers going into the house at night." Another would whisper, and as the rumors spread, they began to take on a life of their own. The Mendoza mansion was no longer just a home. It became a mystery, a shadow in the heart of Oaxaca. It's important to understand the power of the marketplace in towns like Oaxaca. In the 1800s, this was not just a place to buy food. It was the heartbeat of the community, the stage where news was announced, secrets shared, and reputations built or destroyed. If a merchant was dishonest, the marketplace remembered. If a family fell into disgrace, the marketplace was the first to speak it out loud. And once the marketplace began to whisper, those whispers rarely stopped. For the Mendozas, the marketplace became both shield and sword. On the one hand, they continued to purchase goods from its vendors, and the local economy benefited from their wealth. On the other hand, the more they withdrew into their mansion, the more their absence was felt, and the more their silence was interpreted as guilt. In reality, life inside the Mendoza mansion was far less dramatic than the marketplace imagined. Yes, the family had their secrets, but they were the kind of secrets many families carry. The quiet burden of illness, the pain of personal loss, the struggle to maintain dignity in the face of gossip. Don Esteban Mendoza, the patriarch, was a man deeply private by nature. His wife, Dona Isabella, had suffered from fragile health for years, which limited her ability to appear in public. Their son, Miguel, was brilliant but reclusive, preferring books and studies to festivals. Their daughter, Camilla, loved the arts but was often kept at home to care for her mother. They were not a family of darkness, but a family of restraint. They valued their privacy in a world where privacy was easily misunderstood. Yet they underestimated the power of the whispers outside their gates. What makes this keynote motivational is not only the mystery of the Mendozas, but the truth it reveals about human nature. Whispers can be as heavy as stones. Once a rumor is born, it rarely dies. It transforms, grows, and can crush the very people it was never meant to harm. The people in the marketplace thought they were only talking, only telling stories to pass the time. But each word had weight. Each suspicion was a small blow to the reputation of a family that could not defend itself because silence was their choice and their shield. The whispers turned into judgment. And judgment, once planted, grows into isolation. The Mendoza mystery reminds us of something vital. What we say about others has power. The stories we tell, the gossip we spread, can either build bridges or burn them. The whispers in the marketplace show us that when curiosity is mixed with suspicion, it can lead us to imagine the worst in others, even when the truth is far simpler. How many of us have repeated a story without knowing if it was true? How many of us have judged someone based only on what we heard, not what we saw? In the Mendoza's case, their silence invited assumptions. But those assumptions said more about the community's fears and insecurities than about the family itself. And so, the whispers become a mirror. They reflect the need in all of us to be cautious with our words, to resist the temptation of gossip, and to remember that behind every wall, behind every face, there is a story we may never fully understand. The marketplace whispers about the Mendoza family remind us that silence is not a crime. Privacy is not a scandal, and different does not mean dangerous. People will always wonder, always speculate, but the wiser among us will choose to listen with compassion rather than suspicion. In the end, the whispers in Oaxaca were less about the Mendozas and more about the community itself. The need for answers, the hunger for stories, the habit of suspicion. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: if we spend too much time whispering about the lives of others, we risk neglecting the story of our own. For generations, the Mendoza mansion stood as a towering symbol of wealth, secrecy, and power. Its high wooden gates, latticed balconies, and stone walls kept not only people out but also truth in. Rumors swirled in the streets of Oaxaca, whispers of betrayal, curses, and hidden tragedies buried beneath polished marble floors. Yet through all the mystery, the family never spoke. They dined in private, guarded their affairs with an almost obsessive silence, and carried themselves with a dignity that dared no one to question them. But silence, no matter how heavy, eventually cracks, and when it did, it wasn't the patriarch, Don Esteban Mendoza, nor his stern wife, Dona Camilla, who broke it. It was the youngest of them all, a boy no older than 15. His name was Mateo. Mateo grew up in the shadows of the mansion's grandeur. Unlike his elder siblings, who were groomed to inherit the wealth and power of the Mendoza legacy, Mateo was often overlooked. His brothers were taught business and politics. His sisters were raised to marry into influence. Mateo, on the other hand, was left to wander the gardens, read books in the dusty library, and observe life unfolding around him. This gave him something his family lacked: perspective. While his relatives drowned themselves in appearances and secrecy, Mateo noticed the servants' hushed conversations, the townspeople's fearful glances, and the subtle contradictions in his family's stories. He began to piece together truths that others refused to acknowledge. By the time Mateo reached adolescence, he carried a burden far heavier than his years. He had overheard the late-night arguments between his parents about land disputes. He had seen his uncle stash documents in locked drawers. He had heard weeping echoing from the cellar long after everyone claimed to be asleep. The family rule was simple: never question, never repeat, never reveal. Silence was both shield and weapon for the Mendozas, but for Mateo, silence became a suffocating prison. His conscience wrestled with the things he knew. His heart was unsettled by the injustice of it all. He saw how the family's silence cost them not only their peace, but also their humanity. It happened on an unassuming afternoon. The townspeople had gathered in the marketplace, where the Mendoza name was once again the center of discussion. Rumors of missing workers from their estates had spread. Questions about unfair debts weighed heavily in conversations. The people were afraid but angry, and anger always demanded a spark. That spark came from Mateo. Perhaps it was courage, perhaps it was youthful recklessness, but he stood in the plaza and raised his voice. For the first time in the family's history, a Mendoza spoke not to defend wealth or status, but to tell the truth. He revealed that his father had borrowed heavily during hard times, trapping local families in endless cycles of debt. He spoke of business dealings that kept peasants working the land for wages too small to survive on. He admitted that much of the family's grandeur was not built on honor, but on hidden exploitation. The crowd fell silent. The air grew heavy with shock. Nobody expected a boy, a Mendoza, no less to expose what the town had only dared to whisper about. The mansion shook that day, though not from the ground, but from the force of Mateo's words. His parents tried to silence him. His siblings pleaded with him. Servants rushed to pull him away. But the truth, once spoken, cannot be unsaid. Mateo's voice carried beyond the plaza. Within weeks, priests, merchants, and even politicians began questioning the Mendoza family's dealings. Records were unearthed, testimonies were given, and hidden injustices came to light. For the first time, the towering Mendoza mansion felt small compared to the courage of one boy who chose truth over silence. Of course, courage comes with a price. Mateo faced scorn from his family. His father declared him a traitor. His brothers avoided him, and his sisters wept for the shame he had caused. Yet Mateo stood firm. He understood something his family never could. Wealth and secrecy are fragile foundations. Truth, however painful, was the only stone strong enough to build a life upon. Though stripped of inheritance and shunned within his household, Mateo found something greater outside the mansion walls: the respect of the people. To the townsfolk, he was no longer just the youngest Mendoza. He was the voice they never had, the proof that even within power and privilege, conscience could still survive. Mateo's story is not just about a boy in Oaxaca. It is about every one of us who carries the burden of silence. We live in families, communities, and societies where secrets often hide beneath polished surfaces. We are told to stay quiet, to keep appearances, to protect reputations. But silence does not heal, it corrodes. Mateo teaches us that speaking out, though costly, is the path to freedom. He shows us that the youngest, the weakest, or the least expected among us can be the very ones to ignite change. And most importantly, he reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The Mendoza mansion still stands in Oaxaca today, its walls holding stories of grandeur and ruin. Tourists marvel at its architecture, unaware of the storm of truth that once shook it from within. But locals still tell the tale of the boy who spoke when no one else dared, and the lesson endures. Our silence protects no one, but our voice can set generations free. Beneath the grand Mendoza mansion, behind the stone walls that seemed to breathe with centuries of secrets, there lay more than just foundations of brick and mortar. It was a place whispered about in passing, a space that not even the servants dared to mention aloud. The walls above ground gleamed with tapestries, chandeliers, and imported marble, but beneath there was a darkness few had ever seen, a hidden world that carried the weight of choices, sins, and desperate hope. For generations, families like the Mendozas had thrived by maintaining not just their wealth, but also their silence. In colonial Oaxaca, silence was power and secrecy was protection. The Mendoza mansion was a fortress of both. Yet when the youngest Mendoza had revealed fragments of unease, it became clear that what lay beneath the mansion was not merely a cellar or storage space. It was the heart of their enigma. It began with a door that most thought was ornamental, a wooden panel carved with vines and angels, tucked behind the wine cellar. No servant dared to question it, for it was locked with an iron clasp and watched carefully by the Mendoza patriarch. But when rumors swirled about disappearances, hidden wealth, and unexplained sounds echoing at night, curiosity spread like wildfire. Those who lived close to the mansion often claimed they heard muffled cries from beneath the earth, as though the stone floors themselves held voices trapped within. Others said they saw servants carrying crates too heavy for grain or wine, yet they were brought only to vanish into that locked chamber. When finally the truth began to slip through cracks of denial, the secret passage was opened, not by the will of the Mendozas, but by fate pressing too hard on fragile walls of deceit. Descending into the passage, one did not encounter a simple storage room, but an entire labyrinth beneath the mansion. Narrow corridors lined with torches led into chambers where records, artifacts, and relics of power were kept. But among these treasures was something far more disturbing, evidence of the Mendozas' hidden dealings. There were scrolls documenting land taken unjustly from indigenous families, contracts signed under threats, and gold, stacks of it, meant for the crown but diverted into the Mendoza coffers. There were items stolen from churches, including chalices and relics considered holy. It was not simply a cellar, it was a vault of corruption. Yet alongside the gold and wealth was something even more haunting. At the farthest chamber, carved into the stone, was a small holding space. Its walls bore scratch marks, as though fingernails had clawed at them. Whispered stories claimed that generations before, when uprisings had threatened Spanish rule, some families had hidden not just their treasures but also their threats underground, men and women who resisted, voices that could not be silenced otherwise. Whether those chambers once held prisoners or were simply built as places of fear, no one could ever fully confirm. But the markings told their own silent testimony. The question arose immediately. Why would a family so wealthy and respected need to keep such things hidden? The answer, as is often the case, lay in power. Power thrives in the shadows. The Mendozas had cultivated a reputation for generosity and faith, sponsoring festivals, funding churches, feeding the poor at times of famine. Outwardly, they were saints, but beneath, they were merchants of silence. Their wealth was not built solely on trade or inheritance. It was also built on manipulation, theft, and a ruthless grip on truth. To reveal their secrets would have been to tear down centuries of legacy. Thus, the mansion itself became a metaphor: above ground, beauty and elegance; below ground, darkness and deceit. When the youngest Mendoza broke the silence, he did not reveal everything at once. He spoke of unease, of the heaviness he felt in his family's name, of voices that seemed to cry in the night. His courage to question what was buried beneath became the spark that forced others to confront the truth. For him, the hidden chambers were not just physical, they were moral. He saw the scratches on the walls, the hidden relics, the stolen treasures, and he realized that silence could no longer protect them. Silence was destroying them. It is said that he gathered townspeople, priests, and even officials to witness what lay beneath. When the torches illuminated the chambers, the room fell into silence. For no one could deny that the Mendozas' grandeur had been built not just by hard work and God's blessing, but by choices made in darkness. The revelation did not destroy the Mendoza family, but it did change them forever. Some members fled ashamed of their inheritance. Others tried to cling to their wealth, excusing their forefathers' sins as common for the time. But the people of Oaxaca would never again look at the mansion in the same way. What was once a symbol of untouchable power became a cautionary tale. Parents told their children, "Do not build your life on lies, for truth will always find a way to the surface." Priests reminded congregations that God sees not only what is done in light, but also in the shadows. The Mendoza mansion remained standing, but its foundation was no longer pride, it was a scar. The secret beneath the mansion was not only about wealth or hidden chambers, it was about the truth that lives beneath every life. We all carry hidden rooms within us, the choices we make in secret, the thoughts we bury, the deeds we hope no one sees. And while the world may admire the mansion we present, the outer image of our lives, the real measure of our legacy lies in what is hidden below. The Mendoza family teaches us that no amount of wealth or grandeur can silence the truth forever. Eventually, what is hidden will be revealed. And when it is, the question will not be whether others forgive us, but whether we built something worth remembering. To live wisely is to ensure that the foundation of your mansion is not corruption, lies, or injustice, but honesty, service, and faith. For only then can the life you leave behind inspire others instead of haunting them. For generations, the Mendoza mansion in Oaxaca carried a shadow. People spoke of its grandeur, its endless corridors, and its mysterious underground chambers. But more than its beauty, they whispered about its curse. They said tragedy followed the Mendoza family like a shadow that refused to fade. Every celebration seemed to be followed by mourning, every triumph clouded by scandal, and every life marked by secrets that refused to stay buried. Yet history has shown us something powerful. Curses are not always supernatural. Sometimes they are simply the weight of choices passed down from generation to generation, chains forged by pride, fear, greed, or silence. And as heavy as they may be, chains can be broken. The Mendoza family's story was not meant to end in fear, but in redemption. It teaches us that no matter how dark the past, light is always waiting for those brave enough to walk toward it. When young Alejandro Mendoza, the last heir of the family, returned to Oaxaca after studying abroad, he faced not just a homecoming but a haunting. He walked into the mansion not as a stranger, but as a man who carried a name drenched in suspicion. People in the town stared at him in silence. Some pitied him, others resented him, but most kept their distance. He could feel it in every glance, every hushed conversation when he entered the market. The Mendoza name was no longer a symbol of wealth, but of secrecy. It was as if he had inherited not land, not gold, not status, but a curse. Alejandro could have left. He had the means to live elsewhere, to escape the whispers, to abandon the legacy of pain. But he didn't. Instead, he chose to face it, and this is where redemption always begins, with the choice to confront what others would rather run from. One evening, Alejandro ventured into the forbidden chambers beneath the mansion, the ones his elders had always locked away. The air was heavy with the smell of earth and time. Dust clung to every stone, and silence pressed in like a weight. There, he found what generations had tried to keep hidden. Ledgers filled with names and transactions, evidence of exploitation, and records of how the Mendoza fortune had been built, not on hard work and honest trade, but on the suffering of the poor. The curse, Alejandro realized, was not in ghosts or spirits, it was in injustice. His family's silence, their refusal to make things right, was the poison that had spread from generation to generation. It wasn't supernatural, it was human, and that realization both crushed him and freed him. Alejandro could have destroyed the documents, sealed the chambers, and continued life pretending he had seen nothing. That would have been easier, that would have been safer, but he knew what silence had done to his family. It had destroyed them from within, leaving them to rot in guilt, fear, and pride, so he chose differently. He gathered the townspeople, the very same ones who whispered about his family, and invited them into the mansion. In a trembling voice, he read from the ledgers. He spoke of debts unpaid, of wages stolen, of promises broken. He admitted that his ancestors had lived in luxury while others labored in misery, and then he said something no Mendoza had ever said before. "I am sorry, this ends with me." There was silence in the room, heavy, almost unbearable. But then something shifted. For the first time in living memory, a Mendoza spoke truth instead of hiding it. And truth, no matter how painful, always carries the seed of redemption. Words were only the beginning. Redemption requires action. Alejandro made the boldest decision of his life. He transformed the Mendoza mansion from a symbol of arrogance into a place of service. He opened its doors as a community center, a place where children could learn, where the hungry could find food, and where families could gather without fear. The underground chambers, once filled with the shadows of greed, were transformed into storage for supplies, books, and medicine. At first, people were hesitant. Trust, once broken, does not return easily, but Alejandro did not give up. Day after day, he worked alongside the people. He carried boxes, planted crops, served meals. He was not a Mendoza above them. He was Alejandro, one of them. Slowly, the whispers in the marketplace changed. Where once they said the cursed family, now they said the boy who gave us back hope. What Alejandro did may seem small compared to centuries of wrong, but it was enough to break the cycle. He proved that one person can stand against the weight of a family's past. He showed that curses, whether of shame, guilt, or brokenness, are not final sentences but challenges waiting to be rewritten. In time, the Mendoza name carried a new meaning. Children no longer crossed the street to avoid the mansion. They ran inside to play. Families no longer whispered in fear. They spoke of gratitude, and Alejandro's legacy was not wealth, nor land, nor secrecy, but something far greater, redemption. The Mendoza story is not just about Oaxaca. It's about us. All of us carry something from the past: family mistakes, personal regrets, secrets we'd rather bury, and sometimes those burdens feel like curses, heavy and unshakable. But here is the truth: curses only survive in silence. The moment you face them with courage, they lose their power. Redemption begins when you stop running from the truth and start using it to build something better. Alejandro Mendoza teaches us that it doesn't matter what came before you. What matters is what begins with you. You can turn pain into purpose. You can turn shame into strength. You can take what others call a curse and transform it into a blessing. When people walk past the Mendoza mansion today, they don't see a haunted house. They see a light that shines in the heart of Oaxaca, a reminder that no past is too dark to redeem, no curse too strong to break. And when your time comes to leave this world, what will your legacy be? Will it be silence, secrets and shadows, or will it be redemption, courage and hope? Remember this: your past is not your prison. It is your platform, and from it, you can build a future that heals not just yourself, but generations to come. Legacies are rarely measured in wealth or grandeur alone. They are measured in lessons, in sacrifices, in the silent voices that echo across generations, reminding us of who we are, what we must guard against, and what we must strive to become. The Mendoza family of Oaxaca, once shrouded in mystery and burdened by a secret that nearly destroyed them, left behind more than a colonial mansion. They left behind a message, one carved in the choices they made, the redemption they embraced, and the truth they were no longer afraid to reveal. This final chapter in their story is not merely about uncovering what they hid, but about understanding what their lives, their downfall, and their transformation mean to us today. For history, when told truthfully, is not just a record of events. It is a guide for the living. The Mendoza mansion had long been a symbol of power, prosperity, and nobility. Its marble floors, towering arches, and gilded halls spoke of influence. To the townspeople, the Mendozas were untouchable, living proof that wealth was an eternal shield. Yet history has proven that appearances, no matter how polished, are fragile. Behind those mansion walls, the family wrestled with their darkest truths: corruption, hidden guilt, and the exploitation of others to secure their fortune. For decades, their wealth had been preserved through secrecy, and yet, in the end, secrecy became the very poison that corroded their unity. The message here is clear: appearances deceive, but truth liberates. A person, a family, or even a society that relies solely on appearances without addressing the truth within will eventually crumble. The Mendoza story shows us that no mansion, no status, no title can hide what the human spirit knows deep inside. That authenticity is the only foundation strong enough to last. For years, the Mendoza family remained silent about the true origins of their fortune. The people of Oaxaca whispered, but no one dared challenge them. Inside the family, younger members felt the weight of a silence they did not choose, yet were forced to uphold. The youngest Mendoza, Isabel, was the one who finally broke that silence, revealing the truth of the tunnels beneath the mansion, the smuggling, and the secrets buried in stone. In that act of courage, she shattered generations of fear. What does this teach us? That silence is not neutral. Silence can protect, but it can also imprison. Too often, families, communities, and individuals stay silent out of fear of shame, fear of rejection, or fear of consequence. Yet silence comes at a cost. It prevents healing, stunts growth, and suffocates truth. The Mendoza legacy teaches us that speaking up, though painful, can save generations. To break silence is to allow light into the darkest rooms of our history, whether personal or collective. When the secrets of the Mendozas finally emerged, their name was tarnished. Many expected them to fall into ruin, disgraced forever. Yet instead of denying or running from the truth, the family embraced it. They opened the mansion's hidden tunnels to public inspection. They confessed what their ancestors had done and began using their wealth to support the poor of Oaxaca rather than exploit them. This act of courage transformed what could have been a permanent curse into redemption. The Mendoza mansion, once a place of secrecy, became a place of healing, hosting schools, art workshops, and spaces where truth could be preserved rather than buried. Here lies the most powerful message: redemption is never beyond reach. No matter how deep the mistake, how heavy the past, or how dark the secret, change is always possible. The Mendoza family reminds us that history does not have to define us. What defines us is what we choose to do with that history. The Mendozas had wealth beyond imagination, yet when their truth was revealed, their money meant nothing if it was not used for good. In time, they realized that riches unshared, power unchecked, and influence hoarded are hollow. The greatest transformation of the Mendoza family came when they redirected their fortune to serve others. They built schools for children who could never afford them. They provided food and work for those who had been oppressed by their silence. Their mansion became a hub of education, culture, and community support. This shift proved a timeless principle. True wealth is measured not by what you keep, but by what you give. Money, influence, and power are tools, nothing more. In the hands of selfishness, they corrupt. In the hands of generosity, they redeem. The Mendoza story compels us to look at our own lives. Are we using what we have, whether much or little, for ourselves alone, or are we investing it into something greater that will outlast us? Legacies are not built in marble or stone. They are built in choices. The Mendoza family understood this too late, but in their final years, they made a choice to change what their legacy would mean. When people in Oaxaca today speak of the Mendozas, they do not only speak of the secrets they hid, but of the redemption they sought. Their story is taught in schools as a warning against corruption, but also as a beacon of hope that even the darkest history can become a guiding light. The Mendoza legacy reminds us that each of us, regardless of our status, is building a legacy right now. With every action, every decision, every word, we are writing the story that others will tell about us. The question is not whether we will leave a legacy. The question is what kind of legacy it will be. The Mendoza story may have happened in Oaxaca, in the grand shadow of a colonial mansion, but its message is universal. Families today still wrestle with secrets, societies still hide injustices behind appearances, and individuals still struggle with guilt, silence, and the longing for redemption. But the Mendoza story is proof that change is possible. It tells us that truth, though costly, is always worth the price. It shows us that redemption, though difficult, is always within reach. It urges us to live with integrity so that the message we leave behind is one of hope, not regret. At the end of the day, the Mendoza mansion stands not as a ruin of shame, but as a monument of transformation. Its walls remind us that history can wound but also heal. Its story reminds us that what we hide will eventually surface, and when it does, we have a choice, to let it destroy us or to let it redeem us. And perhaps the most powerful message of all is this: Your life is the message you leave behind. The Mendoza family left a message carved in stone and memory, that secrecy destroys but truth heals, that wealth corrupts when hoarded but blesses when shared, that even in the darkest past there is a chance for light. As the sun sets over Oaxaca, the Mendoza mansion still glows in the fading light, a silent witness to the rise, fall, and redemption of a family that once nearly lost itself to secrecy. The people who walk past its gates are reminded that history is not a distant thing locked in dusty books. It lives among us, it speaks through us, and it shapes the choices we make every day. The Mendoza family left a message not written in ink but lived in flesh and stone. Do not be deceived by appearances. Do not remain silent when truth demands a voice. Do not believe redemption is beyond reach. Do not waste wealth or influence on yourself alone. Do not forget that your life, however ordinary or extraordinary, is the legacy you leave behind. The Mendozas of Oaxaca remind us that no matter where we are or what shadows we face, it is never too late to write a new story. Don't let the weight of past mistakes or family history chain you. Face your truth, learn from it, and turn it into something that uplifts others. Your life's mansion, your heart and soul, should not be a prison of secrets, but a home of light for those who come after you.